Years ago, Harry had dated his sister's best friend at 17, but their relationship ended because Kayla pressured him. When he turned 23 and found himself single, Kayla insisted he date another friend, but he refused, leading to a fierce argument that ended with her tearfully seeking their parents' sympathy. Despite this, they remained unsupportive of her demands. When Harry and I fell in love, his parents welcomed me warmly, but Kayla treated me with cold indifference. She frequently referenced Harry's exes unprovoked, insisting he should reconnect with them, behavior that struck both Harry and me as odd. He eventually asked her to stop, but this only fueled her irritation. She teased me about being insecure, suggesting I was unworthy of Harry's affection. Whenever his family invited us for dinner, she would make it a point to invite an ex, claiming it was an accidental run-in, but the underlying intention was painfully clear. Kayla's obsession extended to my social media as well. Though she didn't follow me, I could tell she was the first to view my Instagram stories, often rushing to complain to Harry if a man commented on my photos, accusing me of posting inappropriate content. We would laugh off her baseless claims, but I felt a sting in my heart each time she belittled me, asserting she could find someone better for Harry. Everything took a turn for the worse after our engagement. As congratulatory messages flooded in, I noticed Kayla's silence. Without a word, she stood up and left the party, her exit leaving a palpable tension in the air. Later, she called Harry, crying and berating him for not informing her first about our engagement, claiming their close relationship entitled her to that privilege. Soon after, I received a menacing message from her, demanding I be a good wife to Harry, implying that she had always been the most significant woman in his life. Taken aback by her outburst, I chose to ignore the message, unsure how to respond. This decision seemed to only fuel her disdain. She began to avoid me during our chance encounters, despite her continued involvement in wedding preparations, attending my dress fittings and bridal shower, while expressing relentless concerns about our union. My future mother-in-law and Harry attempted to intervene, but Kayla's refusal to listen persisted, deepening the rift between us as our wedding day approached. As we discussed the centerpiece for the wedding one day, Kayla relentlessly complained. My mother-in-law and fiancé attempted to reason with her, but she refused to listen. Overhearing their conversation, Kayla began to tease me, claiming my choices lacked class and insinuating that her brother deserved someone better. That was the final straw. I was consumed by anger and, unable to contain myself, I shouted that I couldn't endure her constant criticism any longer. I informed her she was no longer welcome at our wedding. The shock on Kayla's face was unmistakable. She gasped, clearly taken aback by my confrontation. Even my mother-in-law was surprised and ultimately sided with me. Later, Kayla approached Harry, telling him I had embarrassed her and that he should control me as my soon-to-be husband. Harry firmly declared his support for my decision and warned her that without an apology, she would not be invited to the wedding. Though Kayla sent me a heartfelt apology, I chose not to respond. Wedding preparations had already drained me, and I didn't want to engage in her drama. Ultimately, she attended our wedding, and knowing her tendency to speak negatively, I ensured the event carried a theme of pink hues and pastels, which the guests embraced. However, Kayla showed up in a black, floor-length gown with a veil, as if attending a funeral. We were left stunned. During the reception, she told everyone she was mourning the loss of her brother to me. Noticing my discomfort, my husband confronted her about her inappropriate attire. She attempted to play the victim, but her act fell flat. I acknowledged her right to wear whatever she wished, conceding that I might be a bit controlling. When she continued to create a scene, Mill and Phil kindly asked her to leave. The entire situation was embarrassing for me, and from that day forward, I avoided her. When I had my son, Nate, I firmly refused to let Kayla near him. Though she tried to fight my decision, my husband and his parents supported me wholeheartedly. They understood my reasons and respected my wishes. 2 years ago, Kayla endured a miscarriage with her then-boyfriend, Jamie. It was a painful experience for her, and Harry and I felt a deep sadness for her as we celebrated our life with our child. In the spirit of forgiveness, we invited her to our home to bond with Nate. To my surprise, she was genuinely sweet to him. However, Over time, the old Kayla resurfaced, lamenting her misfortunes and blaming her past friends and lovers for her troubles. It became apparent that in her worldview, she was never at fault. She consistently played the victim, rarely acknowledging her role in conflicts. This year, when Kayla announced her engagement, she invited everyone except us. Harry was baffled by our omission, as our relationship appeared to have improved during previous discussions. Her reasoning was that I might sabotage her wedding, which bewildered me since I had never behaved that way toward her. She audaciously claimed she had deliberately worn black to my wedding and feared I would bring negativity to hers. This manipulative stance only fueled my frustration, which I shared with Harry. After he spoke with his parents, they decided to decline attending or funding her wedding, which reduced Kayla to tears. In her distress, she shifted the blame onto me for the fallout. Hurt by her actions, Harry stood firm, reminding her that she had acknowledged her mistakes and should not point fingers at me. Kayla argued that our wedding was a long time ago and that I should move on. Yet, with Phil and Mill refusing to pay for her celebration, she reached out once more, apologizing and seeking my forgiveness. I hate to admit it, but Kayla can be quite sweet and persuasive when she wants something. After her wedding to Jamie, which we all attended and enjoyed, I hoped to move on from our past. However, less than 6 months later, Kayla appeared at our doorstep, complaining about how her marriage was falling apart. Harry and I welcomed her to stay with us for a few days, during which she vented for hours about her husband. They seemed to be struggling with infertility, and Kayla was quick to place all the blame on Jamie. I attempted to have a rational conversation with her, but she remained adamant that it was entirely her husband's fault. When she wasn't venting about Jamie, she fixated on our lives, often fabricating scenarios that didn't exist. For instance, I typically go to the gym every morning before work, and on days when I'm running late, I take my work clothes along so I can work out, shower, and change before heading to the office. Sil had started to notice this routine, peppering me with questions about why I needed to go to the gym or take a bath. I just shrugged it off, explaining to her that I enjoy maintaining my weight and prefer not to appear sweaty at work. She would purse her lips and nod in response. Eventually, things settled down for Kayla and Jamie, and she returned to live with him. One weekend, my husband and I went out for lunch with Mill, Phil, Sil, and Jamie, leaving our son Nate with a babysitter since he often grew bored when we adults gathered. As we dined, Mill shared a story about a friend who had recently divorced her cheating husband, taking half of his assets in the process. Sil interrupted, asking my husband if we had signed a prenup before our marriage. Everyone paused, fork suspended mid-bite, and glanced at her. Her question felt like a jab, especially since she acted as if I wasn't even in the room. My husband, however, didn't hesitate to respond. He candidly explained that both of us earned well and saw no need for a prenup. Sil snorted, dismissing our situation with a comment about how many cheaters were around these days and how he could be blindsided at any moment. Her words stung. I felt compelled to confront her insinuation and insisted that there was no need for suspicion since I always carried a change of clothes. I quipped that it was Harry's sister's duty to keep him in check. The moment I said that, I watched my husband's face flush red with anger, a sight I had never witnessed before. He locked eyes with Kayla and calmly told her it was crucial for her to establish boundaries. He bluntly expressed his belief that she wasn't cut out for motherhood and that her child would be better off elsewhere than with someone like her. Kayla looked shocked, while Mill and Phil remained silent, listening as my husband spoke candidly about her tendency to ruin things due to her own unhappiness. He called her a failure and a loser, reminding her that while her husband worked hard, she seemed lost in her own grievances. Instead of shifting blame to me, he asserted that she should focus on her own marriage, hinting that her bitterness was a projection of her struggles. As Kayla began to cry, she cast a glance at Jamie, who sat beside her, seemingly at a loss. I'll admit it. Kayla could be a very difficult person to deal with, often dragging up my husband's supposed indiscretions, which strained our relationship. I felt immense gratitude for my husband standing up for me that day. After calming down, he apologized to Jamie but ignored Kayla. Once lunch ended, we went right back to not talking to her. Her presence was affecting not only my peace, but also my husband's well-being. We decided to block Kayla on all platforms to prevent her from reaching us. My husband, usually calm and composed, had reached his breaking point. He sat there seething, saying, instead of pointing fingers at me and interrogating us about prenups, she should really focus on her own marriage since she's clearly projecting her issues onto us. Kayla was in tears, visibly shaken and bawling, glancing over at Jimmy, who sat next to her in silence, offering no comfort. It was unlike my husband to lose his composure like this. Eventually, she fled to the bathroom, leaving my husband fuming. Mill, sensing his distress, approached him to help calm him down as I gently rubbed his hand. Mill expressed his remorse for what Kayla had said about our son, and I nodded in understanding. I knew all too well how frustrating she could be. My husband was supportive but spoke little. I felt a sense of relief knowing he had stood up for me. After years of putting up with Kayla's behavior, I was grateful for his defense. After he calmed down, he did apologize to Jimmy but chose to ignore Kayla entirely. Following that lunch, we reverted back to not speaking to her. Her behavior affected us both too deeply. Months passed, and my in-laws, Mill and Phil, acknowledged the impact of that lunch, agreeing that Kayla had overstepped this time. They noticed the toll it took on their usually placid son. A year has gone by without communication, and life has been much smoother since. 2 months ago, I discovered I was pregnant. It was a delightful surprise, as we hadn't been trying. My husband and I felt incredibly blessed to be welcoming a new member into our family. We waited for the perfect occasion to share our news and decided my husband's birthday would be it. Mill and Phil planned a big celebration in their backyard to honor the arrival of Harry, our little one. They invited our close family and friends, and Sil must have caught wind of the festivities through others, deciding to show up unannounced. When Sil arrived, my husband and I were taken aback. She approached Harry, engulfing him in a warm hug while telling him how much she had missed him. She expressed remorse over our previous conversation. My husband gently took my hand and suggested that his sister should apologize to me for her past remarks questioning my character. Sil nodded, turning to me and apologizing sincerely. She revealed that she had been attending therapy to work through her personal issues. Though I felt skeptical of her sudden change, I didn't want to create a scene in front of everyone, so I simply nodded in response. Mill and Phil checked in on us, assuring us they hadn't anticipated her arrival. They promised that if we felt uncomfortable, they would kindly ask her to leave, given that this was a celebration for my husband. Ultimately, we decided to let it go for the duration of the party, not wanting to disrupt the joyous occasion for Harry's welcome. I noticed Sil laughing and mingling with the crowd, a behavior that seemed out of character for her. She appeared unusually cheerful, but having mentioned that she was attending therapy, I tried to give her the benefit of the doubt. As the time came to cut the cake, Harry stood up and delivered a heartfelt speech, expressing how he considered himself the luckiest man in the world, thankful for another year with me. His words made me blush with joy. I couldn't help but appreciate that our love remained strong, just as it was when we first started dating all those years ago. With smiles lighting up our faces, Harry and I shared some exciting news with everyone. We were expecting a baby. The room fell silent for a moment as they processed the news before erupting in cheers. My mother began to cry and rushed over to hug me, while Phil had tears streaming down his face as he congratulated both me and Harry. The atmosphere was electric with joy as friends and family eagerly asked us if we had chosen names for our little one. The only person who seemed out of sorts was Sil. Staring at me wide-eyed, she appeared momentarily stunned before walking away, a hint of displeasure etched on her face. I felt a twinge of worry that she might overshadow our celebration, but I was soon distracted by friends coming over to chat. When it was time to serve lunch, I rose to help my in-laws bring out the food. However, Rick and my parents urged me to sit back and relax, insisting I shouldn't lift a finger. As I settled back in my seat, patiently waiting for Harry to bring me a plate, Sil approached, beaming with excitement. She handed me a plate of food, declaring how she wanted to do something special for me in light of my pregnancy. I appreciated her gesture, considering how she had expressed a desire to make amends for her past rudeness. I accepted her offering with a smile. Just as I was about to dig in, I noticed something alarming. Shrimp, something I was highly allergic to, nestled among the food. Shock coursed through me at Sil's choice of dish, given my allergies. Disappointed, I shook my head and got up to find my own meal. At that moment, Jamie came over to congratulate me and noticed my uneaten plate. When I explained that Syl had mistakenly served me shrimp, Jamie reassured me not to worry. He took the plate from my hands, saying he liked shrimp and would gladly have it, while I could get a new plate for myself. I smiled and nodded, relieved, and walked away. Not even 5 minutes later, as I caught up with others, I heard a commotion. Jamie started to retch over the plate he had taken from me, the unmistakable signs of an allergic reaction unfolding right before my eyes. Everyone stopped eating, their faces reflecting concern, as Jamie stumbled to rise from his seat. Harry and Kayla rushed to his side. Jamie pointed at his plate and then gestured towards me, suggesting I could have the shrimp since he liked it, and I could simply get a new one for myself. I smiled, nodded, and walked away, unaware of the events that would soon unfold. Barely 5 minutes had passed when Jimmy began retching, his body heaving over his plate. Attention shifted abruptly as eyes widened in shock. Harry and Kayla rushed closer, alarm in their voices. Jimmy pointed desperately at his throat, an instinctive plea that made our hearts sink further. The realization hit us hard, something was terribly wrong. As Jimmy fainted, the room filled with gasps of horror. Kayla rushed to his plate, her eyes widening in disbelief. She turned to me, her voice trembling as she demanded to know if I had given my plate to her husband. I nodded, the weight of my actions crashing down on me. Amidst the chaos, someone called for an ambulance, and soon, Jimmy was whisked away to the hospital. Kayla's tears flowed freely as she cast angry glances in my direction, her frustration aimed squarely at me. Later, we learned that Jimmy had been poisoned, and a wave of nausea washed over me upon hearing the news. The plate, meant for me, had become a vessel of misfortune. If Jamie had indeed intended to poison me and my unborn child, Harry, Phil, and my parents would remain blissfully unaware. The police collected samples from the food as evidence, their insurance against the unknown substance that had caused Jimmy's collapse. As I write this, Jimmy is still recovering in the hospital, with Kayla keeping vigil by his bedside. My husband and I grapple with the flood of phone calls from worried relatives, each inquiry stirring anxiety about who could be responsible for Jimmy's condition. Mill expressed gratitude for the kindness we've received, but thankfulness felt far away amidst the turmoil. While Jimmy is still hospitalized, there is a small flicker of hope he is improving. Kayla has been by his side overnight. My husband and I remain filled with questions while sheltering ourselves at home, hesitant to return to their place. The events of that day feel surreal. Everything had been going so well until that moment. I am terrified of revealing that the shrimp dish originally belonged to me, served to me by Kayla. If this escalates into an investigation, I will have to confess my part in this unfortunate sequence of events. Guilt eats at me, and my children's safety weighs heavily on my mind. I've sought refuge at Phil and Ida's place, ensuring my kids don't wander near Ida, who handed my plate to Jamie. I can't shake the nagging feeling she may have had a hand in this. I appreciate each comment on my post. They reinforce mixed feelings of guilt and fear regarding my sister-in-law. She seems to possess no boundaries when it comes to harming me, and I can't allow my children to be around her. And Ida, I'm especially grateful for your help, but it astonishes me how many responses I've received. The aftermath still leaves me trembling, sleep eluding me. I can't help but feel partially responsible for the chaos surrounding Jimmy's poisoning. I should have discarded that plate, yet I let him take it. My anxiety deepens at the thought of what might happen to him. My husband has been attentive, but he only sees my worry, oblivious to the deeper fear brewing inside me. I know I need to gather everyone for a calm discussion, despite reservations about who will believe me. Fortunately, Mill and Phil have security cameras around their house. Since the birthday party was hosted in their backyard, we can verify if Kayla served me that dish. I plan to assemble everyone tonight for an update. I am grateful for my supportive in-laws amidst this distress. With Mill and Phil staying with us, I seized the moment at dinner to address an urgent issue. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the situation press upon me. As I recounted the details of the birthday party, how Kayla had served me the shrimp plate and how Jimmy had unwittingly consumed it, my heart raced. The shock painted their faces as disbelief settled in. I noticed the exchanges between Mill and Phil, Concern etched deep lines on their brows, while Harry's demeanor shifted to one of anger. I voiced my fears regarding Kayla's possible motives and previous threats against me, hesitating to share my fears, troubled by the potential repercussions for myself and our unborn child. As I thought about Sil, I shared my concerns with my loved ones. I was worried about what might happen to me and our baby if something were to go wrong. Mill was incredibly helpful, suggesting we review the security camera footage. Phil agreed, recognizing the gravity of the situation. Harry, though visibly upset, remained silent, absorbing the shocking revelation. As we reviewed the footage from their camera app, the truth became undeniable. Sil had offered me the poisoned plate, and the subsequent events led to Ja's distress. The weight of the evidence left no room for doubt, and emotions ran high as we processed the reality of the situation. Harry struggled to contain his anger, now fully aware of his sister's malicious intent. Mill and Phil were appalled by their daughter's actions, shocked at the lengths she had gone to create chaos. We sat in stunned silence, trying to understand why she would do something like this. In the aftermath of this revelation, my in-laws decided to hand over the evidence to the police, as this was a very serious matter. Once Jimmy recovered, Phil and my husband would meet with him to discuss pressing charges against Sil. I was anxious about how Jimmy would react and couldn't help but feel a sense of regret for allowing him to consume the poisoned food. A month had passed since my last update, and I was relieved to finally share some news. My in-laws had given the recording to the police, and after reviewing the evidence, Kayla was arrested. She didn't deny the charges, breaking down in tears and admitting to everything. My husband spoke with Jamie about what had happened, and he was as shocked as we were. My husband urged him to press charges against his sister, emphasizing that her actions were sinister and that he would always be a part of our family. In the midst of her divorce, Kayla reached out to Mill and Phil, distraught and seeking their forgiveness. To her surprise, she discovered she was expecting a baby. She pleaded with them to support her through this journey, especially for the sake of their grandchild. Phil reminded her that it was time for her to take responsibility for her actions. The police had discovered evidence that Kayla had tampered with food, putting both of us at risk. She was facing serious charges and pleaded with Jamie not to punish her, saying it was all her fault. However, Jamie remained determined to hold her accountable. Our court hearing was approaching soon, and I didn't think she could avoid it. By the way, everyone asking, "My son and I are doing well. He's unaware of what his aunt did." Harry and I have talked about it, and we're planning on having a heart-to-heart with him soon to tell him the truth. We want our son to know about these situations and be careful. I've been going for regular ultrasound scans every 2 weeks during my pregnancy, as my doctor advised. We're not planning on finding out the baby's gender since we want it to be a surprise. I'm grateful that my parents are aware of what happened with Kayla and are looking out for my well-being. Given my complicated pregnancy, they're worried that it might take a toll on my mental health, and I'm considering therapy. To be honest, I've been dealing with a deep-seated fear of eating outside food or anything that I haven't prepared myself, ever since Kayla tampered with my meal. My husband Harry has been incredibly supportive, and I'm hoping that with time I can overcome this irrational fear. It's been 8 months since I last updated, and a lot has changed. Kayla is now serving time in prison, having been found guilty of the charges against her. I never attended her court proceedings, but I still find myself thinking about her from time to time. What's interesting is that she eventually admitted to the court that she'd been jealous of me for years. She'd always dreamed of one of her closest friends marrying Harry, not me. When we announced our pregnancy during his birthday party, she was consumed by jealousy. As she was about to share her own news, a pregnancy that had been a long time coming for her, as she'd suffered a miscarriage previously. She said that, fueled by her pregnancy hormones, she'd mixed rat poison into my food, not to harm me or the baby, but to put me in the hospital. However, she'd never expected me to give my plate to Jamie, which ultimately led to him being poisoned instead. The judge was not impressed with her attempt to downplay her crime, and she was sentenced to prison. That meant she'd be away from our lives for a significant amount of time. In a separate development, Jamie has successfully divorced her and is finally free from their toxic relationship. We've stayed in touch with him over the months and continue to include him in our family activities whenever we can. I've apologized profusely to him for giving him my plate, but he's assured me that it was never my fault. Hearing that was a huge weight off my shoulders, and I'm grateful that he's doing okay now. As for us, Harry and I have welcomed a beautiful baby girl into our family. Our son Nate is ecstatic about becoming a big brother and has showered his little sister with love and affection. Watching our children bond has filled our hearts with gratitude. Throughout all this, our parents and in-laws have been there for us, helping us navigate this new chapter in our lives.